Hello, welcome to Carib Nation. My guest today is no stranger to Carib Nation, Beverley East. She's been with us before. She's now written another book called Mitzvah Girl, and we're going to talk about that. Thank you for joining me, Beverley.
Thank you for having me back again.
It's great to have you talk with us again about another interesting book.
Yes, hopefully.
Mitzvah Girl, how did you get to be talking about Bat Mitzvah coming out of Jamaica?
Well, I lived in London, and the family across the street was a Jewish family, and there were 4 women who had no children, so I became their child.
Wow. Now, this is set in a period when many people were leaving the Caribbean and going to England, especially, some to America, to do better, to provide for their families, to get a good job. And very often, we've had many authors write about these situations where young children are left behind with a grandmother or an aunt. And in some situations, they don't end very well. These relationships don't end very well. We either have, when the children do grow up and are reunited with their parents, they don't know each other, there's no relationship. Or we have had parents who the children become barrel children. Mm-hmm. Or we have the parents who strive and work 2 and 3 jobs to bring the children up behind them, to bring them with them. Talk about your situation and how that led to having to be nurtured practically by these women.
Okay, well, my mom was the person that went first. Usually it's the man that goes first, but my mother went first. I was left in Jamaica at 18 months with my father, grandmother, and my sister. Everybody followed after, and I was the last one to arrive. So when I got to London, I was 4. I did not remember my mom, but she took a lot of time to get to reunite with me. There was a family across the street, as I said earlier, a Jewish family. They had 4 women, 4 sisters who didn't have any children. So while my parents worked long hours, they just basically looked after me. Mm-hmm. They were like babysitters, but they were more than babysitters. Mm-hmm. They did everything for me. And the reason why the book is called Bar Mitzvah Girl is because I had everything from them except a bar mitzvah.
Mm-hmm. They just got to the brink and didn't get to the bar mitzvah.
No, part. My father forbid it.
Good old Jamaican.
Yeah, it's like, she's Jamaican. She's Jamaican. No, I think they would have if they could have, but they couldn't.
Well, let's also look at living with these people. What were some of the things that you learned from them, and how did that color your philosophy, your way of handling?
I don't know if it's philosophy. I just knew that I was very much loved by everybody, both my parents and them. I think there's a chapter in the book where I think it describes them the best. It's the day one of the times when I've been bullied at school, one time too many.
Yeah, I did want to talk about bullying.
And I was the only black child in the school, the entire school. So everybody knew who I was, where I was at all times. Mm-hmm. And I was being bullied, all the time. And they decided enough was enough. And so they decided to marshal the school. One sister would come in the morning and stay with me till lunch. Another one would come in the afternoon. Then the next day, another one would come. And in the afternoon, another one would come. And that's how it went on for nearly 3 months. And no matter what the headmaster or what the teachers said, they would just come because they wanted it to stop. And it wouldn't stop until they showed up. So to me, that's in a nutshell. They did lots of things to assist my mother and me. But that, to me, it was the core of their spirit of who they are, who they were then. And they were very good to my mom. It didn't matter how late she worked. It was never a problem, me staying with them. Even when I had the measles, I was taken over to their house and stayed in their bed. Wow. So my mom could go to work. They were the 4 women. One was a housewife, so she taught me how to bake cakes and stuff like that. And one was a teacher. She taught me 1 syllabus ahead of myself, so I was always the brightest girl in the classroom because I knew everything by in the first term.
Another reason to bully you.
Yes, but I didn't know that I was being taught ahead of myself.
Yeah.
And then two of the sisters had their own shop. And even if what they sold, they didn't have, if I wanted an item and they didn't have it in their shop, they would go to all the warehouses and find it, source it, and get it for me. So I was just,
Boy, were you special.
Oh, special.
Right. Now, to go back a little bit about bullying, to me, that left a message for me. And it tells me that we hear so much about bullying today. There are a lot of people who commit suicide, etc., because of bullying. It is that commitment, and that is what struck me about that, and that we need more parents today, or the village, really, to stamp out things like bullying.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a great lesson that we can take and pass on.
Today, when I watch bullying on the television, it still makes me cry. I still cry. I'm still that little girl that was bullied at school, and it still hurts. And so when I see that pain, I recognize it because I've been there, and been there twice. Because when I went to Jamaica, and I wasn't the only black child, I was in a school full of black children, but I was still bullied because I was the English girl with the English accent. There was, it just forms itself in different ways.
There will be a way. They will find a way.
Yeah. So I was just always bullied, and I don't have the same personality that I have now. That when I tell people I was a shy child, no one believes me because it's like you. Yeah. But I've grown into a different person because I have to. And in the book, I nearly get expelled because I whacked somebody one day because she's bullying me.
Yeah, but many people will tell you that's the way to stop it.
But I learned late, and by the time I learned, you're older when they think you should know better, but it's just like enough already.
Exactly.
And I end up almost getting suspended from school, So, but it forms itself in different ways. The people I think that bully you, they're usually the fearful one, but you don't know that they're the fearful one.
Yeah, that's true.
They're afraid of you.
Defense mechanism.
Yeah, they're afraid of you, so it shows in a different way.
Yeah, yeah.
But at the time, you're too young to know that.
Of course. Yeah. Let's talk about when you were left with your grandmother and your father, and the role that they played and how they worked or accepted this new family, this village that you were thrust into, so to speak, and their take on this Jamaican culture juxtaposed with this Jewish.
Well, my grandmother was in Jamaica and the Jewish family was in London, so my grandmother never had any interaction.
She wasn't concerned about this.
She may have been, but I don't know because I was too young to know. So that was never a conversation that I had with my grandmother. I did go back to Jamaica and I lived with my grandmother for 2 years. But I think when you're that young, you just accept what is nice and comfortable. So I don't think there was much theorizing or philosophizing about these. Yeah, it's just 4 women loving you and taking care of you. And my mother knew that I was safe with them. And I remember once they were going on vacation, the family, because they also had brothers, so it was a bigger, bigger family than just the 4 women. And the thought of not seeing me for 2 weeks they couldn't cope with it. So they took me with them. They took me with them on my vacations.
My goodness. Talk about love.
Yeah, they took me with them. And first of all, my mother was like, oh, I don't know.
Yeah, because then she's going
to because everything was planned for me to go and stay with my own, my mother's family and my father's family for the summer holidays. Everything was arranged. And they were going, we're not going to see her for 2 weeks? No. She needs to come with us. And I went with them, and it was one of these all-inclusive, like Butlins camp, summer camp. And I was the only black child on the whole complex, and everybody was staring. And they would act like nothing. It was nothing to them.
Because you were, you were part of them.
So it was nothing to them. And if someone stared, then they would make sure they had something to say about it. Yeah.
So you didn't really have that feeling of being an outsider, even though in many cases you were the one black, or you stood out?
I didn't feel an outsider when I was with them because I felt protected. I felt more an outsider when I was in school.
Yeah.
And then because I had a very close-knit Jamaican family, when I was with them, everything was fine.
Yeah.
Within that family,
Right.
you know, I didn't have real friends until I went to college, because all my time was spent within my family.
Right.
Because my mom felt I was safe, you know, within my family, with my cousins. There's lots of pictures of me with my cousins,
with your family,
not with friends. You know.
Well, that's great, because it's important to keep that grounding.
Yeah,
I think that's what one needs.
Yeah, somebody once called us that we were like the Jamaican mafia. You know, that there was no way in. You know, there was no way in. But to me, I think you know, my mom was very protective. You know, of us not being hurt or not being. And back then there was so much misunderstanding. Now, if a family moves into your house or into your block, you can Google and learn everything you want about that family or about their lifestyle or about their religion. But back then it was a guessing game.
A guessing game, yeah. You just assumed based on what you saw.
Yeah, or if you had the courage to ask a question, you would ask a question. But, you know, most people assumed that, you know, we were dirty and we were lazy and we were incapable of doing anything, you know.
The whole time of growing up in the Caribbean can be, you can be so sheltered that you don't even realize what you don't have, because the amount of protection and love and togetherness that you have in the Caribbean. And I suppose that was what was so easy for you to accept in London.
Yeah.
Having that same feeling of warmth and connection and people looking out for you, and not having to battle on your own, so to speak.
No, but when I lived in Jamaica for the 2 years, the book is divided into 3 parts, and part 2 is in Jamaica.
It's in Jamaica,
and where I'm back with my grandmother and my uncle, and when I'm with them, I realize I still don't have any friends, because my grandmother, you know, insisted on me coming home straight from school. I wasn't having a great time in school anyway, so I didn't make friends in school. But when I came home, she made everything so wonderful. You know, there'd be coconut drops and
let's talk
drinks
about your
ready and all kinds of stuff ready for me that, you know, you just wanted to come home because you knew something nice was going to be there waiting for you when you walked in the door, you know.
Grandmothers, my husband always says, grandmothers are the greatest friends. They either always have something in their handbag or something in a drawer somewhere.
There's
always something that you can get
from.
There's always something good to look forward to being with grandma. She
was very intolerant with everybody else, but she was very patient with me and my uncle. You know, my uncle had epilepsy, so she was very patient with the two of us. It was like we were 2 children. And he was a grown man, but she still treated him like he was, you know.
Let's talk a little bit about that era with your grandmother, her rules, and the scenario with your uncle, and the relationship you had with your uncle as well.
Well, because my uncle had epilepsy, he wasn't allowed to go anywhere. He wasn't allowed to work. He wasn't allowed to just wander off anywhere. She always felt afraid that, you know, if he could have a seizure, and who was going to take care of him? So he wasn't allowed to go anywhere, and so I felt like he became my child. You know, I felt that I had to be responsible. Although I was only 7, I felt I had to be responsible for him as well. You know, so if you know, once I realized that he had, you know, this tendency to just have a seizure anywhere, I just wanted to be sure that
he was safe.
Yeah. And then I found out that he couldn't read or write, and then I took it upon myself that I was going to be his teacher. And I'd come home every afternoon after school, and we'd sit with our books, and I would teach him his ABC, and I just felt like a real adult, you know, that I had a responsibility. You know?
How empowering that can be. What about your relationship with your dad?
My relationship with my dad was very close. By the time I got to London, I remembered only my dad and my sister. I didn't remember my mother. I didn't want to have anything to do with my mother. And I would just follow my dad or my sister around the house. And I would tell my mom that my mom was coming to get me. So whoever you are, whoever you are, nice lady, just stay over there, because my mom is coming for me. Yeah. And I kept telling her, my mom is in England, so, you know, whoever you are, you're an imposter. So, but my dad was very quiet, very calm, and I probably don't remember from the other book that I wrote, The Kendall Story, The Reaper of Souls. My father had lost 14 members of his family in the train crash. So he was a very quiet man. I have no memory of him other than being a quiet person. But later on in life, I heard that he could dance like the Nicholas brothers, and he would enter all these dance competitions and all this stuff. And I'm like, who? You know, Daddy?
This person?
Yeah, I mean, the only time you got any kind of animation from him was cricket. I mean, I could tell you everything about cricket. Yeah, I could tell you everything about, for a girl, because he didn't have any boys. So I know cricket inside. I know all the players. I know everything you need to know about cricket. And so I used to go to cricket matches with him and, you know, go everywhere he went, because I wanted to be, you know, when I wasn't with my Jewish aunties, which was at the weekends, I was with my dad and obviously my own family. And Monday morning, Auntie Bessie would come and knock at the door for me to come and get me, because the weekend was too long to be missing from her. So, but I had my own, you know, my own Jamaican life. So I was like a Jamaican person at weekends, and weekdays I was a Jewish adopted child, you know. So that's the back and forth. And sometimes when I talk, and I was talking to somebody last night, and they started laughing. I says, why are you laughing? They says, because your accent changes. You talk patois, you talk standard English, you talk, you know, you just change. And I says, well, I grew up in all that change, so that's all I know all of it, and I hear all of it, and I speak all of it.
Cockney to patois.
Yeah, to standard English, to whatever, you know, whatever you want me to do, I could.
Well, we do want you to do. I do want to hear it. I want to hear about Granny's rules.
Granny's rules.
I think you've got them.
They're in the middle. I think where the yellow slip is.
Somewhere here. Yeah, there's the rules. Rule number 1.
Rule number 1. Never touch Granny's rifle. It is loaded. Rule number 2. Keep a careful eye on Baba. Rule number 3. Stay out of the sun, or you're going to get too black. Rule number 4. Take a nap in the middle of the day, because all decent young ladies did this. Whether I wanted to sleep or not, there was no discussion about it. I often protested, but as soon as I slipped out of my dress and reluctantly put my head on the pillow, I was out like a light. And when I woke up, Granny would have a nice fresh drink for me. Rule number 5, don't make friends with the helper. You and them is not size. Rule number 6, keep the main gate shut always. The word always had been added in a different color ink. Rule number 7, which did not apply to anyone in the house, but to everyone outside it. Don't come on my property after dark, because you just might get shot.
Oh, my grandma was a serious bird. She was serious.
Yeah, well, you know, most people
had... She was going to protect her family at all costs.
Well, she had 6 children. My mother was the youngest. She was a widow and single mom. And there's no burglar alarm, there's no AD&T. And
that was her burglar alarm.
Yeah, she just felt her pepper tongue and her gun was all she needed. And as long as I lived with her, no one ever came on the property after dark. Even if they wanted to speak to my mom, they would call from the gate. You know, someone would come to my mom, hey, Miss Winnie, I'm here. You know, because there was no gun, there was no dog barking.
Of course.
So, you know, you had to announce yourself.
Yeah.
And if you didn't announce yourself, then you were up to no good.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, you were up to no good.
Now, she did have a situation where your uncle had his supposed girlfriend come on the property?
Yeah, she came on the property, but we don't know where she came from. I really don't know. I mean, maybe I was too young to know. Maybe the adults knew more than I did. So I'm only writing it from my perspective. But a young woman who was mute just slipped into the yard one day and got friendly with my uncle, and she kept coming back, and Granny didn't want him to have no interactions with girls because he had epilepsy and she couldn't speak, and what kind of baby would this, you know, what would happen to the two of them? So in her own way, she felt she was protecting him. And one day he she wakes up and the girl is there kissing my uncle. And she just gets out the shotgun and tells her to get the hell off her property. So
she was not going to be a party to that.
No. So the girl who couldn't speak, she just lifted up her dress, to show my Grammy, heck with you.
Her indignation.
Yeah, indignation, and didn't have on any underwear. So it was,
Oh, my.
It was her way of saying, up
Yeah,
yours.
take that.
Yeah, up yours.
Take that.
Up yours. I don't know what happened to her, but, it was just one of those things that as a child, when you see that, it's
those
like,
are things that,
Ooh, and then you try to bring it up in conversation, and my mom
will have it said.
My mom is like, don't go there.
Nobody's going to talk about that. You later then, how did you eventually develop the relationship with your mom?
Oh, my mom was very patient. She took time off work, took me everywhere, and she was always very keen to know what was going on. I mean, if I had an accident on the street, she'd be able to tell you what I had on, down to my socks and underwear. She'd be able to tell. So although she seemed very busy and, oblivious to everything, she was not.
Present mom, yeah.
She was very present. And one of the things I can honestly say about my mom, although it's not in the book because it's when I'm much older, when I was in high school, when I was in college, I was studying economics and I couldn't understand a thing. I couldn't understand any of it other than supply and demand. I couldn't understand any of it. And I came home complaining to my mom that I didn't understand what the teacher was telling. And she took an evening class in the same subject
to make sure
and taught me. Yeah.
Wow.
So she was always, conscious of what was going on and how, how she could support it. She was very strict. She doesn't think she was strict. She says she was disciplined.
Well, they never do.
No. But she was very strict. And if she said no, then don't try to negotiate it. So if she said no, I would just go across the street and get what I want. Why try to
battle here when
exactly.
I can get it over there?
I'd like say, Mom, could I have? And she goes, no. And then I just go across the street and I get it in all the colours,
Once you got back to Jamaica, how did the rest of your growing up, so to speak, how was that affected by some of what you had gone through in the earlier?
I think going back to Jamaica was the best thing that ever happened to me because it gave me a sense of identity, which I noticed that with black British kids in London who have never had the opportunity to go back to where, because some of them are born in England, so that is what they know. But I think those 2 years being in Jamaica gave me a good sense of identity and pride. So when I went back to London and was back in a school where, the teachers weren't used to having black students, so they didn't quite know. So they were very careless in how they would teach us stuff. And so it kind of helped me to get through school, in some form or the other. And so like when they were talking about slavery and stuff like that, I had learned it from a different perspective, where to them, we were just commodities and not real people. So I would think about it with pride, and I would often challenge the teacher and say, well, not all slaves were slaves. There was Nat Turner and there was this person and this person and Harriet Tubman. And would she know who these people are?
Exactly. Yeah.
Would she know who these people
exactly.
are? So when you challenge them, you're being disrespectful and
of course.
And so I was always doing detention.
You're always
troublemaker.
That gave you that grounding.
Yeah,
that
I'm glad
allowed
for
you
it.
to stand up.
I'm glad for it, especially the day she drew the bananas wrong up on the wall. She drew them growing downwards, and everybody from the Caribbean know the banana grows upwards. So I got into trouble for that as well because I tried to.
How dare you challenge the teacher?
Yeah.
In writing the book, what was the toughest thing for you to address?
The toughest thing to address, it's finding bits of information about people when they're dead, because all 4 sisters are dead. So I had to rely on my uncle, one of the husbands of the women, who was 100 years old. I had to rely on a memory of 100 years old.
Wow.
And he had a pretty good memory. But there were bits, obviously, that... And one day I asked him about one of his sister-in-laws, and he says, it's not that I don't remember anything. I didn't like her. So I can't tell you anything. Yes, so he says, it's nothing to do with my memory. And I'm like, well, where am I going to get that information from? So I called one of the nephews, because these women had 5 brothers.
Oh, wow.
So, there was an army of people out there to go to call on. So I contacted one of the nephews who was actually doing a genealogy study on the family. So he gave me...
it was just perfect.
Yeah. So that was the hardest thing. And then I think writing about my dad was hard, because my dad is also dead, and there's questions that I would have liked to have asked him. My mom, of course, had plenty to say. And so, but she had an impeccable memory. She never looked up anything. Wow. I sat down with her, and she told me, I just put it in the iPad as I was listening to her.
Excellent.
She could tell you every day everybody arrived, and
dates
she just,
and everything.
And I asked her, how did we end up in that house opposite that Jewish family? All the places in London, how did we end up there? And she said she was living with her cousin, and her cousin, the landlord of where her cousin was living, told her that there was a bigger house, a bigger space that could accommodate all of
everybody.
us. Because we hadn't arrived yet.
Okay. Well, it's been a great time talking with you as usual.
Thank you for having me.
And very best to you with your book.
Thank you.
And
can I just say where they can get the book?
Yes, you can get it on...
Well, the best at the moment is to call me directly at my office, 202-434-8767, or you can email me on handwriting3, the digit 3, at AOL.com.
Thank you so much for watching us in Carib Nation. Until next time, I'm Doris Dean, and remember, our motto is one people, one culture, one Caribbean, one nation.